Well, everybody, like Kim said, we've got a great panel today. I'll go ahead and let everybody introduce themselves and kind of take you through their backgrounds a bit. But to go ahead and kick things off, I guess, why don't we just have Jack, if you want to start things off and let everybody know who you are, I think that'd be great.
Sure, absolutely. Appreciate that. So my name is Jack Leidecker. I'm the CISO for Gong, which is a sales enablement company, and I've been in security about 25 years.
Awesome. Steve?
Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Lodin. I've been focused in security since about the early 90s and have been working the past 9 years at Sallie running the cybersecurity operations team. Just recently, due to the Great Resignation, I just absorbed the IAM team as well. You'll notice that I'm the only participant without CISO in my title. I've worked with some great leaders over the years, and my current Chief Security Officer, Jerry Archer, is one of them. He's given me lots of opportunities to contribute, learn, and grow in my role over the past few years. Looking forward to the discussion today, Brian.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. Sajan?
Hello. Thank you for having me here. My name is Sajan Gautam. I'm the CISO for Arvest Bank. It's a regional bank based primarily around Arkansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, and Kansas. Thank you again.
Awesome. And wrapping up with Jonathan.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I appreciate it. Jonathan Kimmitt, CISO of the University of Tulsa here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I've been CISO for 7 going on 8 years. I've been in IT security and for probably the last 20 some odd years in some form or fashion as a response team, and I'm really excited to be here with everybody.
Awesome. Well, as everybody can see, we've got a really great lineup in our panel today. We're going to be talking about the maturing role of cybersecurity leaders. That can be a CISO, but it doesn't have to be a CISO. There's all types of folks that do take leadership positions within cyber. So, I guess I'll just kind of kick it off with everybody. Jonathan, why don't we just start with you? But what are some of the key challenges in security leadership, over the last few years? I know that's sort of, it's a very high level question, but really focusing on, what has gotten harder and maybe what has gotten a little bit easier.
Thinking about that, it really is a difficult question because, there's so many different aspects of security and what we do. I think what's gotten harder is scope. When we talk about scope, used to be security, let's go back 20 years, 25 years, security was thinking about firewalls or networks and computer security. Now we're thinking not only about that, but also our users, our security awareness. We're also talking about vendor management. We're talking about risk mitigation. We're talking about insurance. We're talking about a variety of topics. I know a lot of being higher education, we have a lot of people who come through our cybersecurity programs here at the university, and they've got this job mindset of what cybersecurity is going to be about, and then they come to me and I tell them, I was like, oh, well, I'm doing vendor contracts today. I'm going through privacy on that, or I'm building my presentations for the board. I'm doing leadership for different professional societies, around the area. So there is so much to being a security leader nowadays. It's not just the technical anymore. It's not even just strategic anymore. It's grown so much more that we kind of have to be a little bit of everything and understand a little bit of everything just to be able to be effective at our jobs. And that's, protecting the people and protecting the systems that we manage.
Very cool. Sajan, same question for you. What's gotten harder, what's gotten easier, and how has it changed?
Yeah, absolutely. So Jonathan brought up a really good points about what has gotten harder, but I will focus more on what has gotten easier, because I do agree with all the things Jonathan said. Those are definitely harder. But what has gotten easier is, from pure security perspective, cybersecurity is accepted as a biggest priority of the company, of any organization. That means the leadership is much easier, right? Because it is accepted that it is a priority, so it makes the job easier as a leader.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, I think that's definitely something that we're seeing trending up in terms of responsibilities. Jack, what's your take on this?
So I think one of the big shifts you've seen is how you have to be more focused on the business, right? I think a lot of people in security, we all started in tech, but then there was always kind of this big concern of, are we speaking the right language? Being able to kind of be aligned with the business, I think, is one of those key aspects. I think as kind of Sajan actually identified, being part of a company where that is key, right? Is that a top priority? What are you doing? I think that's one of the biggest things that's easier. I purposely picked a cloud company where our customers require us to have a high level of security because of the data we get. I much prefer to be a part of a company like that than one that's a cost center, right? And not every company is the same in those regards, but shifting that discussion of what's the business value that security is actually bringing back to the business, I think to me is once you actually have that discussion, that's a lot easier. It's a much different type of discussion than, hey, I'm just doing these widgets and nobody understands what it is.
Yeah, no, that's a really fantastic point. And Steve, rounding out the question with you again, key challenges and what's easier, what's harder.
Yeah, from my side, you're going to hear much of the same things. Three things: changes in reporting, less into CIOs and more into higher in the organization, COOs, CEOs. You heard Naomi talking earlier in the keynote about that. She's the CISO and the CIO reports to her. The second is, just as mentioned earlier, a lot less talk on technology and more on risk. And third, I think the business is much more amenable to security requirements now. They don't want to be part of the same horror stories that are coming out like Equifax and Cap One and all of the fines that are being levied against them. We see stronger regulatory pressure on this. So security is, as mentioned also earlier, one of the biggest risks to companies these days.
Yeah. Steve, let's stick with you for this follow-up because, before COVID, when I would travel out to your neck of the woods and we'd get to meet face-to-face years and years ago, we've talked about this, but what are some of the big differences you see maybe in yourself or others between that newly anointed security leader and maybe someone that's a little bit more seasoned?
Yeah, a good question. I think the first major point there is language. I think this was brought up earlier, but we're not talking security metrics and how many systems have AV anymore. We're talking risk to the company. What's the risk on the bottom line? And then how can we help the company be digitally enabled to make more money? And the second piece is just that business understanding. It's, again, not technology focused. It's where does the company make money, what products and services, and where does the company lose money? Is security an impedance and weighed against non-compliance and breaches?
Yeah, there's more and more discussion these days about everybody that's a C-level, regardless of their title, has to be concerned about that bottom line and has to be concerned about the business of what the business is. And security did, a while it was kind of trapped in sort of that IT box, but I think over the last maybe half a decade or so, it's really sprung free, and I think that's helping. But Sajan, what's your take on that? Sort of the seasoned versus the new leader in this space.
Yeah, I do totally agree with what Steve just said. Paraphrasing a little bit, it's not just the depth of the knowledge, but the breadth of the knowledge, right? Because back in the days, the CISOs or the security people used to be very in-depth in the security side of the house. So it's like, firewall security, antivirus and all. But now the CISOs or myself are getting into the breadth of the thing. So I'm learning more in the business side. I'm learning more on the finance, risk management, and all those things. So that is where I do think the shift is happening.
Oh, very cool. Jonathan? Jonathan, you're on mute, I think.
So that's, I certainly agree with that, what everyone's saying. The pieces that I was thinking of, as a seasoned security professional, whenever I'm working or I'm consulting or I'm doing whatever, you can kind of tell about how old they are in security by how calm they are. When you're a seasoned security professional, you're a CISO, you're someone that's done this, when you have an incident, okay, let's all right, step 1, step 2, step 3. You've got incident response under your belt, you've got experience under your belt. You walk in, you're very calm, you keep your emotions down. When you get told no by the board, whether there's no funding or resources, you go, okay, well, then let's go figure it out. We can't do this piece, but we still got to maintain security. Let's figure out another option, So I think that when we're talking about seasoned versus new, that's the biggest thing that I see is a lot of people, those young security professionals get very emotional very quick. Whereas you've got some experienced people that
they've been to the rodeo a few times.
Yeah, they've done this. They know what it's like, and they walk in. They're confident. They know they even if something throws a curveball, they take it in stride and they step around and they keep on moving forward. So that's kind of what I see.
A mentor of mine once told me that the shorter the title, the slower people tend to talk. Because they don't have to talk fast, which is why CEOs only have 3 letters. So I don't know if that's true, but it was an interesting statement. Jack, let's round out that question with you.
Sure. So, I agree. I think being able to be calm is one of the key aspects, but I think I'd actually like to highlight that I think it's good when we do get new leaders and we get new perspectives. I think sometimes it's too easy for us, even as a community, to kind of fall in love with the same type of ideas. I actually love seeing people coming in from different aspects. And it's like, hey, why are we talking about this when maybe we can talk about this to the business a little bit differently? So I actually think one of the parts that I've been seeing more encouraging is there really isn't a direct path to CISO, contrary, I think, to popular belief in some cases. And you've kind of seen that, whether it's shortage, whether it's necessity, even who's successful, which I think is really interesting because we go back 10 years ago as kind of a more specific profile. You're seeing people start to kind of branch out of that. And I think actually having different perspectives, because it's not, okay, I have to be the person who came in from AppSec or something else anymore, but did I come from risk? Did I come from a different area? Or maybe I did. And how do we kind of work together as a community to really find better ways to both talk to ourselves and the community and even to our boards and everyone else? So from my perspective, kind of having a blend there is actually really helpful. So you don't just get, I would say, kind of the same thing going around and around.
Yeah. Well, Jack, sticking with you on this, I'll just sort of, build on that. If we think about the role from a risk management and sort of a threat management perspective, what are some of the hot topics? Now, I know it's January 2022, and we've been inundated with every security vendor under the sun telling you the top 10 security predictions for 2022, which is fine. I get it. PR agencies love that stuff. And we've been hearing everything from cloud migration to securing their Internet of Things to ransomware to the skill gap, and there's plenty. But from your perspective, what are kind of the hot topics that you're seeing?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. And what are you focused on, right? Am I worried more about the latest vulnerability? Log4j obviously came out. That was fun for a lot of people throughout December. Hopefully not too much now, but still some people are dealing with it. I think the biggest aspect is how are we creating what we want the business to be aware of, quite frankly. So I think what's less relevant to me is what's actually happening externally as it is, what are we doing? How is that helping the business? Is there risks to the business that have changed, right? Are we required to do things differently because compliance changed? I mean, even one of the things you've seen, HITRUST now has a medium level certification instead of just R2, right? Are people going to want to start doing that more? What are we looking for? So I think the biggest aspect for me is really trying to figure out of all the fun noise, as you mentioned, every vendor has fun things they want to talk about. There's always lots of stuff on the news. What are you focusing on as a company, and what are the priorities you want to highlight so you can make progress on this, right? It doesn't do anybody any good to have 50 different things you're trying to do. What are kind of your top 3 or 4 you're wanting to look at, and how does that affect your business? And for me, that's really what I'm more focused on is, okay, as we're looking at our planning, what do we want to do as we're continuing to scale? How do we make sure our businesses feel more secure with what we're doing? How is that moving what we're doing? And is there additional risks we need to account for? Because there's going to be another Log4j, right? Like this isn't something brand new. It's how do we make sure we're prepared, not just internally, but with our vendors, I think is one of those other key areas we're seeing a lot more focus on.
Yeah, prioritization is so critical in this. I can remember really early in my career, I was working with Bell Labs, and I was down in Brazil at the time. So I lived in Brazil for about a year, and we were doing this big telephony security system layout for all their networks throughout basically all of South America. I just remember we had this huge punch list of things that we had to do. And I was like, well, which ones do we need to do first? What's the highest priority? And they said, well, everything's the highest priority. So that meant nothing was the highest priority, which really meant that things took us probably 3-4 times longer than it should have because of that. It's such a simple thing to say, well, prioritize what you've got. But it's actually, if you're going to do it right, you have to bring in those business stakeholders to really understand, how do you prioritize it beyond just what are the technical steps that I need to take to reach that. So now there's a lot involved in that statement. I appreciate that. Jonathan, what's your take on that? What are some of the hot topics right now?
I think one of the biggest hot topics that we're seeing this in cyber insurance, we're seeing this in a lot of compliances, and it's this mindset of don't tell me, but show me. When we talk about CMMC, it's not, we can't just sign the paper saying, yeah, we're doing all these pieces, these basic security guidelines, whether it be NIST or CIS or whatever. But instead, having the auditors come out for the third party, auditing, and they say, okay, show me how you're doing it. Actually do this piece you say you're doing. So when I'm talking to a lot of people nowadays, it's not so much that we still need to do the basics. We absolutely do, but we also need to show it. If you say you've done something, let's show it. What are the effects of it? How do you do it? Demonstrate it. And I think we've all seen that with cybersecurity insurance over the last year, where they're coming back and they're saying, hey, you've got to fill out this sheet of paper, maybe these 20 sheets of paper. You need to be doing all this stuff. I expect that's going to convert over the next 2 years into you've got to have a third party evaluation to verify you're doing those things. CMMC is that way. PCI has been like that for years. We've got other compliances where you have people come in and do that. So I really think that our biggest hot topics moving forward is, are we doing the basics? Are we doing those frameworks and those things that we should be doing? And can we prove it? Again, if you think about CMMC, the reason why that's a thing is because people weren't doing it. And so the DoD came back and says, well, okay, you say you're doing it. Well, we're going to have to verify this. We're going to have someone come in and verify this, because look at the results that's happening so far. We need to change that. So I think that's the biggest hot topic that I'm seeing, that we're seeing in this area, is we're getting to the point that not only do we have to do these, but we have to be able to demonstrate that we're doing these security controls and these basic concepts.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Demonstrating effectiveness, right? That thing that was supposed to block is blocking. That thing that was supposed to detect is detecting. Not just playing at lip service, right? That we patch and vulnerability scan. One of the areas where I've seen a lot of this pop up, just maybe in the last 6 months, has been IoT. And I never really, to be honest, I never really spent too much time thinking about it. We all know that IoT stuff is out there, but to learn that, you walk in a door at a bank and there's probably 50 IoT devices around you before you take 5 steps, and UPS systems and video cameras and common access cards and everything else. There are little Linux servers scattered everywhere. Most of them have no passwords, and they're all doing Bitcoin mining, things like that. So all these new things kind of pop up, and I don't think we would have paid much attention to something like that a couple of years ago. So definitely it's a moving scale. But Steve, what's your take? What are some of the hot topics in your area?
Well, as you probably recall from the past couple of years, we're a bank, but we moved 100% of our assets in the data center over to the cloud. And you saw a lot of presentations on that. We've gone from stage 1 of move it into the cloud now into stage 2 of digital transformation. I really think that moving into the cloud, especially for the small, medium-sized business, is a huge win, because all of those basics that Jonathan talked about are being done by the infrastructure team that you're procuring to do your cloud stuff. The other one that nobody mentioned, I'm surprised so far, but ransomware is still huge on people's minds. The board really cares. They ask all the time, how are you doing? And the regulators. And things like Log4j that was mentioned earlier, they care about that. So they want to see your story on how do you demonstrate prevention, how do you demonstrate detection, and they want to make sure that you're doing your tabletop exercises so you're prepared for response. So that's really the big things that are hot topics here for right now.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up ransomware. Just yesterday, actually, I was in a meeting with what I think is sort of a new a new space, which are ransomware negotiators, which are usually law firms that are brought into these incidents to help negotiate during ransomware incidents. But it's really interesting how deep they get from a legal perspective, a business perspective, a technical perspective. How much crypto should you buy just in case you do need to pay it off? Because as you know, there can be a few days before making a transaction and having funds available. So do you want it on hand? And there's so much that's going into that. And then there's the social media shaming of people that have been hit by ransomware. And that's sometimes more painful than the ransomware itself. So on the PR side, dealing with that. So that's becoming a huge issue. There's almost like, shall I say, even like a cancel culture around being hit with the ransomware and sort of the shaming that's associated with that, which is something I've never seen before, but really a interesting topic for sure. And yeah, I don't think it's going away anytime soon. And let's wrap up the question with Sajan. Hot topics. What do you think?
I think both, Steve, Jonathan, and Jack, they already covered quite a bit, but I'm going to go back to what Jonathan started with, cyber insurance. But even earlier than that is the cyber loss exposure or the cyber risk quantification, right? Because that has been a hot topic, because before you buy this cyber insurance, how much should you be buying the cyber insurance for? Because unless you do have that quantification done, it is hard to buy the appropriate coverage. So I think that has become the hot topic for now, right? At least right now for me.
Yeah. What Sajan, I'll just kind of throw this at you because I think it builds on that. And this is a question that came across from the questions here. One's from Cheryl. She says, what are your thoughts on leaders addressing the cybersecurity talent shortage?
A lot of avenues, right? There's one is building your own internal talent. That means there could be a lot of pockets within your own organization. Can we train them in cybersecurity and use them? So that is one approach. But I wish I did have an answer for all. That could be one approach I could think of. Another is getting rid of this certification or education requirements when that does not provide any values. Because many times we do have this very stringent requirements on education and certification, but not directly tied to the job that they can do. Something to think about. I wish I did have all the answers on that.
Yeah. Well, Sajan, just a follow-up on that too. So when we think of security leaders as being strategic, and I think probably everybody on this panel and probably in this audience thinks security is strategic, but sometimes that's a bit of a fight, especially amongst other executives in the board. So certainly a CEO, a CFO, COO, VP of sales, there's no doubt that those are senior level executives. But if you go to the CFO and you say, how much money do we have in the bank? You generally don't want to hear something like, well, we've done some vulnerability scans and we followed best practices and NIST 853 this. And you just want the number. What do we have in there? So yes, I think security leaders have gotten a little bit of a pass because it's been a bit more nebulous. We stop bad things, but now there's this requirement. But I guess fundamentally, are security leaders thought of as strategic, do you think, by boards and other executives? And if so, or if not, why or why not?
Yeah, I think it's getting better than before. But before we get into the how of the things, we need to get into the what of the things, right? So what of the things is, what is the risk the organization is facing? That's the first question, right? And how we are addressing that. And then what is the cost and benefit of the solutions? If we start talking to board of directors or executives in those type of dollar and cents, I think they would get it. Because at the end of the day, CFOs, CEOs, they do understand the numbers. It is the CISOs, they do not understand the numbers in most cases. But if we start talking about the numbers to the CFOs and CEOs, I think they will get it.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think, and I could be completely wrong, but I think it's the responsibility of the security leader to speak the business language than the business people to understand everything about security. Because try to convince a board of directors to think about security just as much as they do the bottom line, and it's not gonna happen. I just want to call out a couple of folks that, since we're getting a lot of questions, which is fantastic, and statements, but a couple of statements here. One from Jamie: high trust is also being pushed out more requiring evidence of implementation. Absolutely. I think evidence-based security is sort of the new. I think this whole notion that we've had leading up to now, which is assumption-based security, I assume my tools are working. I assume my people will know what to do in an incident. I assume this process that was written in the 1980s and it's in a red binder on top of the microwave in the break room is still as efficient and effective today as it was then. I think we're past that. So yeah, I completely agree. And I think high trust pushing that really makes sense. And Jack said, approved ransomware payouts is a little fishy. Definitely. And boy, what a rock and a hard place, though, right? If you don't have the right backups and mitigation steps there. But let's go to Steve actually on that same question, Steve. So security executives, are they getting the love at the board level, or are they not really seen as strategic in your opinion?
Well, I think at the board level, you're starting to see more security executives having built-in time in the agenda. But to demonstrate that strategic approach, here's an example where security was strategic for our company. We drove the initial cloud migration that we've accomplished a couple of years ago. It besides saving money, everybody goes to the cloud to save money. It improved our security maturity considerably with increased visibility and a new service providers that provided better security than the managed data center that we had. And it's really helping IT deliver not only the cost savings, but a more nimble IT to the organization. So it's funny that also that you mentioned that security evidence. As you know, we've been an early customer of Mandiant, Veridin to be able to demonstrate our maturity in our security environment to our regulators and to our auditors by using the Mandiant security validation tool. Love it. Continue to use it.
Yeah. And, as you were saying that, we had another comment here, this one from Chris, saying the single most underlying hot topic should be comprehensive asset and data management. I couldn't agree more, especially on the asset side. Companies, whether it's in the cloud, on-prem, SaaS, and most likely some kind of hybrid solution that includes all three, knowing where your critical assets are. And to my point earlier about the whole IoT diatribe that I went on, when we're finding out that for every traditional IT device, you generally find 4 IoT devices, which I was completely blown away by. I had no idea that number would be so high. So that's really a good point.
Funny story on that,
yeah.
Brian. I think you might have heard this from me before, but I have a guy on my team that has in his board in his cubicle number of days since Steve last set inventory, and it's usually 0. I agree.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to the statement. If you don't know you've got it, how do you secure it, right? And when you go through M&A and growth and people come and they leave in your company, we all know the issues there for sure. Jonathan, let's kick the original question back over to you. Are security leaders strategic, and does the rest of the team see them that way?
I think that's a trick culture question, because it's dependent on the culture of the organization.
Yeah.
I can tell you this: some of the best CISOs that I've ever met and interacted with, and kind of those people that I look up to, they can be the person that is needed by that organization at the time. If they need to be that strategic person, great. If they need to be that technical person, great. If they need to be that management person, great. They, when you talk about what CISOs do, and I would hope, and I think that everyone on this call, we've got this idea in our head that, a CISO is here to protect. And, in my world, I always start with, we protect people. We protect them. We protect their data. We protect their systems. So when a CISO is in an organization and they're needing to be in front of the board, and the board is expected to be very strategic, or the other C-suite, and they're expected to be very strategic, I think there are people who can become that. But then there's also people that can immediately turn around to be that very technical CISO and very programmatic CISO. And so I think that the answer is yes, there's an expectation that CISOs need to be strategic. But I'm going to flip it around just a little bit. I think CISOs need to learn, some CISOs, as they grow and mature in the organization, they need to learn that there's going to be days that they have to think that strategic way, and they have to do that for the group that they're in at the time. And then the very next day, they may be a very technical CISO, and they have to think that way, and they have to act that way. So the answer is yes. And I think here's the thing. I always talk about how there's a lot of overlap between magicians and CISOs. And I know that kind of sounds funny, but when we talk about magicians, they always have tricks ready to go. They might have a gimmick in a pocket, a deck of cards. They might have stuff up. They have all these things ready to go. And I think a good CISO is the same way. They can walk into that board, and when the board needs to talk about money, absolutely, let's talk about what this program costs and what we need to do to move forward. But if you've got a CISO on your board, as we've got several CISOs that are on our board here at the university, there are times I had to immediately switch and go right into the technical stuff because that's what they're wanting to know. And we have to be able to answer those questions and be ready. So I've got to have that stuff in my pockets and up my sleeves just in case I need to be that person at that time. So the answer is yes. I think that organizations are expecting CISOs to be more strategic, but they're also expecting them to be more technical. They're also expecting them to be more management and directive and leadership. I mean, it's kind of a full gamut. And I think good CISOs can be those different people when it needs to happen.
How come the CMO and the CFO never have to do that? It's why we chose this, right? This dynamic space we're in. And actually, Jonathan, as you were talking, I was going through the questions. By the way, thank you everybody for sending in so many questions. I'm not skipping you. I'm trying to interweave you in when it makes the most sense, but I think it does now. So David wrote, Jonathan, what are some of the ways to determine how the company values security, and being able to use that information really to form metrics that, essentially the board cares about?
Okay, so I'm going to be very, very blunt on this one because I run into this a lot. Ask them what's important to them. One of the things that we talk about here at the university, but we talk about an organization, is when you go into a room and you are the least dressed person, you're in shorts and flip-flops and everyone else is in ties, what does that show? It shows a respect to the other people in the room. And there's a judgment on that, good or bad or indifferent, there's still a judgment. So when we're talking about what is it important to the board, I'm going to go ask them. I'm going to walk in and say, here's what I do. This is why I do it. This is what we would like to accomplish. Tell me what you are worried about so I can address those concerns. Tell me how you want this information so I can provide this information to you. I really discourage people to, when they try to guess what to present to the board, just go ask them. I'm very fortunate, and I know I'm very fortunate. Our board is extremely supportive of us. And if I go to my board and say, we need to do this thing, I've never had them say no. They may say, well, that's going to be really hard to do if you think we really need to do it. And to me, that shows a respect for them to my position. So I turn around and I show that respect right back by only telling them and giving them the things that they need to have and want to know. I don't go out with extra stuff. I don't do the Scotty thing where I say it's going to cost me this much money, but it's only, it's going to cost me $2 million and only going to cost me $200,000. I mean, you don't do that. You be honest, you ask questions, and you answer questions. If they ask you a question, you say, I don't know, but I will get that answer for you and I will have it to you by the end of the day. Show respect to the board, show respect to what they need, and just ask them. That's what I do anyway.
But Scotty would argue, if you say you can only hit warp 3, but you pull out warp 4, then you're the hero.
That's true. There is a side to that.
Jack, let's finish up that question with you. Security leaders, are they getting the love, and if so, why or why not?
So I think a lot of it, honestly, is dependent upon the board, right? I mean, the NACD released guidance. Boards are supposed to be more aware of these risks. Everybody thinks they should be. However, I will say most boards, unlike what it sounds like the university has, don't have security experts on, right? We have a technology person, we have a finance person. You don't actually see CISOs on a lot of boards right now. So I think actually from that perspective, it's still our responsibility to make sure that we're being strategic. Again, figuring out what works for the board is really important, but I do think there's still some work to be until you see more security expertise part of the board. Because if it really is a strategic risk, it's something that we should be worrying about, they should be worrying about. Similar to why you have finance and tax experts and you see a lot of CIOs and everyone else on there. I think until we actually start seeing more CISOs on boards, it's still going to be a little bit of a mixed bag.
Yeah. Well, and I'm building with that. Cheryl had a follow-up question here that I really like. She said, what are your companies doing to build diverse teams? And is it instrumental to diversity and creating that culture, et cetera? I want to get your take on that, but I'll just share something. So I have 2 daughters, and they're both interested in STEM, one on the medical side and one on the engineering side. And I was really pretty blown away about how many opportunities there are actually for young people to get involved, whether it's robotics or biomedical introductions, and they can kind of like shadow medical professionals. A lot of time that's virtual now because it's hard to get a young person to a hospital with COVID. But all these opportunities. And then I was really fascinated, especially on the medical side, to find out it was like 80%, teenagers, 80% of the teenagers were girls. And on the engineering side, it was almost a 50-50 split. So I'm very enthusiastic about that part of the diversity that I'm seeing. But I'm also very aware that we're doing a panel right now with a bunch of white guys. So that's one part of it. But
not all white in that regard.
Not all white.
I was going to say no.
Yeah, not all white.
Sorry to jump in, but I think that one I would love to talk about that.
But I do think it's we're in probably an area that's maybe a little bit more diverse than maybe some other areas in tech security is. But I'd love to hear your take on that and kind of what you think.
Sure. Yeah, no, I'd love to actually take that. I would say we do have a diversity problem in security, I think in tech in general. Yep. So I'm actually the co-lead for our Latinx ERG at Gong. It's something that I'm actually a big proponent. It can be confusing because my name doesn't always make it obvious. And it's all why I put like my flag and different things on it. My mom's actually from Honduras, right? But you don't actually typically see a lot of representation across the board. I also think it's really important to have diverse perspectives. That's why even when we were talking about new leaders, I'm like, I actually think it's good. I'm tired of being the only one that's maybe has a little bit of a different background in that regards, right? So I think the more that you see that, even what is our ratio, because yes, we may have mostly, let's say, white, or we have one like me that's kind of half. We don't have any females on, right? So like that diversity is something that we've really, I think, been struggling with. But honestly, it's something that I think requires a lot of focus. Like it's not going to magically get better. I think being aware of, hey, you know what? You don't have to have this exact same background. How can we build and train that? How do we nurture it? How do we make sure we can help work through whether it's a great resignation or we always complain about talent shortage? There's lots of different ways. There's lots of people who want to work. People are excited about different things. How do we make sure we have the right support infrastructure to do that? So I think from that perspective, it's absolutely critical because our attackers are getting better and faster. If we don't increase our diversity, one, just because of labor shortage, but two, you get much better ideas when you have 4 or 5 different views, right? I've always been a big proponent of that. Even with my team, sometimes it's like, oh, well, you said it's a good idea. And I'm like, yeah, but I just threw something out there. I don't want everyone to agree with me. If anything, I would say usually my first idea is a bad idea. Yeah. Like we come to a much better solution when we work together as a team, right? Like one person, even if they're the smartest person in the world, is going to pale in comparison to a team of people. So I think really understanding what we're doing there, focusing on it, making sure it's key. What are you doing with your company? How are you focusing on that? Sometimes it's easy to say, oh, you know what? No one applied that came from that area, so we're just moving on, right? It does take an actual effort, I would say, to try and do that. And it's a big focus that I've had, but also even I think our company, and I appreciate that, is how do we measure diversity across different groups? How can we set targets associated with that? How do we make sure we're doing it? Again, we're not looking to compromise by not getting the best candidate, but how do we make sure we get the right candidate pool so we can still bring really qualified people, but we're not stuck with just one type of person?
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic. And I actually did mean to say a panel of guys, not a panel of white guys.
Okay. Then we also have Sajan too. So
yeah, I know. Sajan's like, hey. But it's interesting, and I'll tell you one area, and then I want to move on to the next question because I want to get to a few more here. But in threat intelligence, for example, so Mandiant, we have a very big threat intelligence group, and I'm not here to push that or anything. But if you look at different threat intelligence teams, I have found, and certainly here at Mandiant, that diversity is a huge bonus. Not just the obvious stuff. And there's some obvious things like being able to speak, many different types of languages and having an understanding of many different cultures. But it has to do with perspective, and it's also diversity in background. It's not, threat intelligence isn't filled with a bunch of people with engineering, computer science, or mathematic backgrounds, just like security isn't. You've got people in there with degrees in biology and philosophy, or no degree at all, or liberal arts. And that, I think, is what makes a really effective threat intelligence team. So I think that's one area where I've seen a huge, huge bonus. But with that, Sajan, let's go ahead and turn to you, and I'd like to ask you from a security leader's communication perspective, to be effective as a security leader, how often do you need to talk to the board, and what do they really need to know? Do they need to know all the detail, or how do you kind of balance that out, the volume and sort of the velocity of that communication?
Yeah, I think some of those were already covered by Jonathan and Steve. So I'm just going to refer that back. But the thing is, it's not the how, the frequency, but what, right? What is the message? Then it depends on the what determines how. If the message is shallow, you do not want to do that, right? So the frequency does not matter. But if this is important information, then that determines the frequency. So I do not think there's a hard and fast rules on it, but usually quarterly might be. If you press me for hey, you have to give the number, then I would say at least quarterly.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. And I've seen all sorts of things, Sajan, in this. I've seen people that say, well, we have monthly meetings or quarterly meetings, or it's just ad hoc, nothing's planned. And I don't know if there's a right or wrong, really. I think it really depends on the culture. I think as long as that communication is open, so if something critical does happen, there aren't 5 steps that have to be approved and you go through to have that communication line. But I have also seen this where, they invite the security leader to come present to the board, and they're all excited because they haven't got to do it before. And this kind of goes back to our question before about sort of the new security leaders. And they've got, 100 PowerPoint slides that it's going into this super granular detail about these ransomware attacks and things like that. And the eyes are just glazing over people. So next time when they get invited to talk, instead of getting 60 minutes, they get 5 minutes. So you've got to understand your audience for sure at that level. But with that, I'd like to kick this one over to Steve. There's been a trend that I think it's a trend, but I'm not sure if it's a trend or if it's just specific isolated incidents. But we're starting to see the CIOs now report into the CISO. And I was actually working with a pharmaceutical the first time I saw this a couple of years ago, where the CIO, she promoted herself to CISO and hired a CIO under her. And the reason was, look, we've embraced the cloud and we've got BYOD, and we've got people in marketing that are spinning up services that we're not even aware about. And the role of the CIO is kind of changing or morphing. I will even say shrinking a little bit, where the purview of the CISO has grown. But Steve, you're in contact with so many different security leaders, especially in the financial services space. Is this a trend, or is this just an anomalous blip that you think we're seeing?
Yeah, that's an anomaly. It's not yet a trend. It hasn't shown up in the market today. However, having said that, we have experienced direct communication from our regulator saying the CISO reporting to the CIO is no longer the best practice for a financial services industry. So we moved them out of the IT organization and into the COO in our particular case, giving more side by side, and rather than controlling security, limiting security, focusing security on non-risk related things. So it raises that level of communication to the CEO and raises the expectation on risk management rather than technology management.
Yeah. Very, very cool. Very cool. Yeah. And somebody typed in here, know your audience. Absolutely. So let's move this to Jack now. Jack, what are some of the mistakes security leaders make, and what's the best way to avoid them?
So that can be a nice loaded question in that regards. I think there's.
I was going to say that could be a whole book.
Yeah, I was going to say, which do we want to focus on something? I mean, we've been talking with the board a lot. I'll kind of do that one just for fun. I think you already mentioned it too. How are we presenting? What are we really trying to convey? Right. I think that's always one of those big challenges, honestly, especially from a leadership perspective. If we get too much detail, you can shut people down. Conversely, if you give no detail, you become this magic black box that's probably just as destructive. So I think the biggest aspect is really figuring out what is the right level of information that I need for my business to understand, one, what we're doing, what's the value that we're bringing, and how are we measuring success, right? Because it's one thing to be able to talk about, hey, we all agree it's risk and we have to do it. It's super important to the business. Like I could say fun things like our company doesn't sell upmarket without security. Awesome. Okay, great. But what does that really mean, right? How can we actually measure if we're getting better or we're getting worse, right? And I think that's where that shift to more risk versus just regular metrics is difficult at times, right? Because it's really easy just to throw a whole bunch of data out there. But if that data only means something to you, it's actually not helpful in the broader scheme of things. So being able to kind of get that right mix of what's good for me, but also good for my management team, what's good for the board, is one of the areas where I think you've seen a lot of challenges for security leaders in general, both new and seasoned, right? And why you have so much turnover as well, right? If you do this incorrectly, you're probably not going to last more than a year or two.
Yeah, no, and good point. It's I think it's one of those roles where it becomes pretty evident pretty quickly if you're not very good at it. And you have to learn, right? Mistakes have to be made to get better. But let's go to Jonathan. And this is a question that I want to get everyone's feedback, but we'll go ahead and start with Jonathan on this one. But what are the skills that the next generation of security leaders will need to be successful? Technical and/or business skills?
Well, my answer was going to be one thing, but then you limited me to the technical business. It's people skills, honestly. And when we talk about people skills, that's, we talked about diversity earlier. We talked about knowing your audience earlier. We talked about, your role and what you need to do at any one time. I think that's really important that the new security the professionals, as they're coming up, they really understand the people side of our jobs. I made a comment in another presentation where I don't know of anybody who got into IT whenever I got into IT, or even the last 20 years, because they liked working with people. I mean, that's just kind of the thing. They like working with computers and programming. But think about how many people things we deal with on a daily basis where our networks manage life safety systems. We manage more private data and confidential data and PII than we've ever managed in the existence of the world. I mean, it's if we don't understand that security is about people, and that as you are growing in your professional life in security and taking that people aspect into account and building the skills around it, so talking to people, understanding people, and understanding what you're doing, then I think that that's going to be a limitation for you. So I think that people skills, understanding where the people skills are and how to communicate and how to talk, how to engage, how to have empathy and all these things, I think that's really important.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. When you said they got into computers because they like computers and maybe they weren't so into people, then they thought the job was all about people. I think that's really, really telling. And it kind of actually made me think of critical infrastructure, like industrial control systems and PLCs, and maybe people got into that at one point because they were these super closed off, air gapped, systems, digital systems that control physics, pressure, temperature, flow, things of that nature. But now you look at a modern industrial control system, it's connected via Ethernet and wireless Ethernet and serial over Ethernet and Bluetooth. And there's a dial-up modem in the back for the vendor. And it's got Modbus and DMP3. It's the most hyper-connected thing. And the CISO, I think, in security is becoming the most hyper-connected role. So yeah, it definitely has a different persona. Thanks for that, Jonathan. Steve, what's your take on that? What are the skills the next gen of security leaders need?
I think knowing the business is really critical in that first 100 days of a CISO's new career. Make sure you understand where the money flows and where security's role is. The other piece that I think is critical is understanding that there are gray zones and how to manipulate and move through those. Security is not black and white. There's not a yes or no answer. There are gradients and there are compensating controls. So understanding that, I think, is also critical.
Yeah. Very, very good. Jack?
I think people are kind of talking about it. It's how do you work with people, I think, is one of those really key aspects. And then I think the other part that is really key, and we talk about diversity a lot, how do you build a team? I think that's something that sometimes gets kind of missed a little bit. Yes, we want diversity, but how do we make sure that it's well-rounded? Not just that it's diverse, but how are we ensuring that we're getting all the right skills we need based on what the company needs? I think even your PLC example is an interesting one, especially since I used to be in data centers, right? Used to be nice and like segmented, but now it's all interconnected. It's a totally different environment than it was even 5 years ago. So making sure that your team, whether you're training them up or bringing in different people, is able to meet the needs of the business and you understand the risks that are out there. I think that's really key, and making sure that I would say you never stop learning, as cheesy as that is. I think that's always been key. That's why I've always liked security, but making sure people realize that, right? Like this isn't something that you're getting into this career and, hey, I got my certs, I got my job, I'm done learning, right? Like you need to constantly want to be improving because it's a very dynamic area.
Yeah. I wish I had access to a panel from 20 years ago when that similar question was asked, because I believe it would probably be stuff like, well, read TCP IP Illustrated Volume 1, skim Volume 2, and use Volume 3 to prop up your monitor or something like that. No offense to Volume 3. It was mostly the code. But anyways, so Sajan, let's wrap up with you and sort of, what are the skills for the next gen of security leaders? What do they need?
Yeah, I think Jonathan, Steve, and Jack covered all. I don't think I do have anything additional to add, but I will reiterate that we need to, as leaders, we need to understand the business, the risk management, finances, and all, right? So that's all I could offer.
Very cool. Well, following up on that, Sajan, what we talked about the skills that they might need to have, and we talked about people skills and maybe some more of the soft side skills, which I absolutely agree is critical. But where can security leaders go to obtain these skills? Is it further education, certs, conferences, podcasts? Where do they find this stuff?
Everywhere, right? It depends on your learning methods, because some people prefer learning through books, others prefer learning through podcasts, but those information are available everywhere. So all, I think.
Okay. How about you, Steve? Any favorite sources for this type of information?
Yeah, I think one of the key pieces there is to leverage your peers in your community. And also there are organizations that can help you out. For example, the Security Advisor Alliance. They put together an organization of peers in the CISO community, and they also try to do give back into the community. So there's plenty of opportunity from that perspective to leverage your peers.
Yeah, and this is absolutely not a plug, but it's going to come across completely as a plug. So I have a podcast that I do called the Security Effectiveness Podcast, and you can find it on Spotify and your favorite podcast watcher. But the only reason I bring it up is I did a mini series where I actually interviewed board members, and I talked to board members about what do they care as it relates to cybersecurity. And these were board members from publicly traded banks, there was board members from healthcare companies, from technology companies and VCs, and a relatively good mix, I think. Anyways, it was really telling actually to hear what these board members thought of cybersecurity, kind of at the highest level of the business operation, and kind of the skills that they wish that security leaders would have when working with them. And a lot of it came down to like understanding business metrics and understanding, what it is that board members really need to do for their fiduciary responsibility to be effective, and then kind of working back from there. Okay, where are the gaps I have in my skill set? So just plugging that in there. How about you, Jack, Eddie? What's your hot take on that?
I think, honestly, it really depends how you want to process information. I don't think there's any one right answer. I think the biggest aspect is try and get as much data as you can. I mean, I grew up with DEF CON for 25 years. Love that conference, always have. But some people don't, right? Some people like podcasts more. Some people like other things. I think the key thing is don't limit yourself and always continue to learn to make sure that you can try and get as much information as you can.
Very cool. My very first DEF CON was DEF CON 5. There was maybe 500 or 600 people, and they had Spot the Fed and the TCPI drinking game and all that was a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. But the door prize, if you won Hacker Jeopardy, was an actual door that somebody stole off a Pac Bell telephone van. It was a door, right, which I thought was absolutely amazing. But,
yeah, that's that one.
Jonathan, let's wrap up this question for you. Where can these security leaders get these skills?
Well, I'm going to agree with what everyone said. I mean, you've got your normal things, your conferences and your trade shows and all that stuff. But there's one thing I'm going to slightly change the question a little bit, because I had somebody once on a panel who asked all the panel members, how do you become a stronger leader? How do you get better at speaking to the board and things like that? And everyone went down the line and they all said, Toastmasters and this and practice in a mirror and whatever. And I sat there and I go, I took an acting class. And everyone turned this old timer CISO, and he looked at me like, what? And it's like, listen, I took an acting class in college, and when you figure out how to be the person you want to be, maybe you're trying to mimic another CISO or whatever, that becomes really powerful. So, and the only reason I bring that up is because I don't want people to exclude life experiences that they have had in everywhere, whether it's being martial arts, or maybe it's sport, or maybe it's acting, or maybe it's college, or maybe you name it. I think you take all those experiences, and if you look at it as that was an experience that makes me a better CISO, I can tell you right now, my experience being assistant manager at McDonald's has made me a better CISO. And I think everyone needs to take those experiences and really get that value out of them and go, hey, yeah, this is continuous security improvement. How about continuous self-improvement by those past experiences? So just my little tidbit at the end.
I love it. No, that's great. And Jonathan, we'll start off with you, but I'd love to get everyone's, in 30 seconds or less, because we're almost out of time. What's one bit of advice that you would give a security leader? Jonathan.
It's about people. Everything you do is about people. Make sure you make your decisions on what's best for people, and you'll never go wrong.
Awesome. Sajan?
Offer solutions instead of saying no.
Yep, very good. We don't want to be the roadblock, for sure. Jack?
Align yourself with the business.
Very good. These are great. Steve?
Read the room. Don't be a jerk.
We should be writing these down. No, that's awesome. Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, thanks, guys. This was, I really enjoyed this panel. We got a ton of questions. I tried to get to as many of them I could. There was a lot of them. This was a really interactive audience. I love it. For the ones that we didn't get to, we'll get to you offline as well. But thank you so much. And with that, it looks like we've hit time. So I'll hand things back over to Kim to move everybody on to the next section.